The galaxy had 4,200 species that could travel between stars. They spoke different languages, breathed different gases, and built their empires on worlds made of ice, fire, rock, and light. They agreed on almost nothing. They fought wars over territory, resources, and pride. They argued about trade, borders, and whose god was real. But there was one thing every single species agreed on. One law that no one questioned. One rule carved into the founding codex before any of them had learned to make fire. Directive Zero. It was short, it was clear, and it was absolute. Do not disturb Sol 3. Do not contact its inhabitants. Do not enter their system. Do not provoke them. Let them sleep. Sol 3, a small blue planet orbiting a very ordinary yellow star in a quiet arm of the galaxy. They were soft, short-lived creatures who spent most of their time arguing with each other, staring at glowing screens, and eating terrible food. They had gone to their own moon once, planted a flag, and then never gone back. They had no shields, no faster-than-light travel, no energy weapons. By galactic standards, they were nobody, and every species in the galaxy was terrified of them. No one remembered exactly why. The oldest species, the archivists, beings made of crystallized light, who had existed for hundreds of thousands of years, they remembered pieces, fragments, broken recordings from a time before the Galactic Concord existed. Whispers of an age when humans walked among the stars and did things that no species had done before or since. Things that bent the laws of nature. Things that ended civilizations. But no one talked about it. The rule existed. That was enough. Until the Valesi decided it wasn't. The Valesi were a reptilian species, tall, proud, and covered in dark green scales that shimmered like metal. They had built the largest military empire the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. 17 star systems had fallen to their fleets in the last century alone. They were strong, and they knew it, and they wanted everyone else to know it too. Their ambassador to the Galactic Concord was a male named Kovan Shell. He stood at the center of the Great Assembly Hall on the station world 8th Spire, surrounded by delegates from thousands of species, and he spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. Directive Zero is a fairy tale, he said, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. It is a story told to children. We cling to it like frightened animals hiding from thunder. And for what? For a species that cannot even leave its own orbit. He brought up images of Earth. Cars stuck in traffic. People taking pictures of food. A man arguing with a bird. This is what you fear? Kovan laughed. These creatures are nothing. Their planet is rich in resources and strategically located. I propose we repeal Directive Zero and open Sol 3 to contact. The assembly was silent. Then a soft light rose from the far end of the hall. Elder Munum, one of the last archivists, floated forward. They were ancient, so old that their crystalline body had cracked in places, light bleeding through the fractures like veins of fire. You do not know what you are asking, Munum said. I know exactly what I am asking, Kovan replied. Munum was quiet for a long moment. Then they activated something. A recording so old that the data format was nearly unreadable. The hull's projection system struggled to display it, the image flickering and distorted. 10,000 warships belonging to a species called the Craven, a powerful ancient race that had ruled a quarter of the galaxy long before the Concord existed. The ships were enormous, bristling with weapons, arranged in a perfect battle formation. And approaching them was a single ship, small, dark, human. The recording distorted, static, noise, a flash of something that the sensors could not understand. When the image cleared, the Craven fleet was gone. Not destroyed. There was no debris, no energy signature, no radiation. The ships were simply gone, as if they had never existed, as if the universe itself had forgotten them. The Craven were never heard from again. Their worlds were found empty. Their cities stood untouched, meals still on tables, lights still on. But every single Craven had vanished. That was one ship, Moonem said into the silence. One human, and they were not even angry. They were merely annoyed, said Kevon, stared at the recording. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, but pride is a powerful thing, and Kevon had too much of it. A forgery, he said. Ancient propaganda. I call for a vote. The vote was held. 4,197 species voted to keep Directive Zero. 3 voted to repeal it, the Valesi and 2 small nations that depended on Valesi protection. The matter was settled. Directive Zero would remain. But Kevon had never planned to wait for permission. He returned to his private quarters and opened a secure channel to Valesi Military Command. His fleet, 200 warships led by the flagship Dominion's Fang, was already in position. He had sent them before the vote, before the summit, before any of this theater had begun. Commander Torvak, his most trusted officer, was waiting for orders. Enter the Sol system, Kevon said. Take the planet. Prove to these cowards that their precious directive is meaningless. And if the humans resist? Torvak asked. Kevon smiled. They won't. Look at them. They can barely resist their own stupidity. The channel closed. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, 200 warships adjusted course and slipped toward a small yellow sun. On the station world 8th Spire, the assembly delegates returned to their quarters, relieved that the vote had gone the right way. Moonem floated alone in the dark hall, staring at the place where the recording had played. You fool, they whispered, though Kevon was already gone. Your poor, proud fool. And on Earth, in a small village on the coast of Norway, an old woman named Sigrid sat on her porch and watched the sun go down. She had lived in this village for 40 years. She kept a small garden. Her neighbors thought she was kind and quiet, and perhaps a little strange, because sometimes she would stand in her garden and stare at the sky for hours, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. Tonight, she heard something. It was faint, a vibration in the fabric of space, like a string being plucked on an instrument that only she could feel. Ships, heavy ones, entering the solar system at faster-than-light speeds, heading for Earth. Sigrid's eyes changed. The warm brown faded, replaced, just for a moment, by a deep, ancient gold, the color of a star's core, the color of something that had been sleeping for a very, very long time. She set down her tea. Oh, she said softly, they're here. She did not sound afraid. She sounded sad. The kind of sadness that comes from knowing exactly what is about to happen, and wishing, with every fiber of your being, that it didn't have to. The birds in her garden went silent. The wind stopped. And somewhere deep inside her, in a place that had been locked and buried for 12,000 years, something ancient opened its eyes. The Valesi fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel, just beyond the orbit of Mars. 200 warships, each one the size of a small city, arranged themselves in a perfect attack formation around Earth. Commander Torvak stood on the bridge of the Dominion's Fang and looked at the blue planet on his view screen. It was beautiful. He hated that he noticed this. Scan the planet, he ordered. His science officer, a sharp-minded female named Ilian, ran the sensors. The results came back in seconds, and they were exactly what Kevon had promised. Primitive radio signals. Chemical-based rockets sitting in museums. No orbital defenses, no shields, no energy weapons of any kind. The most advanced thing on the planet was a network of communication satellites that the humans used primarily to send each other pictures of small animals. They are completely defenseless, Ilian reported. He had expected this. But some small part of him, the part that had read the old stories as a child, The part that remembered his grandmother whispering about the sleeping giants of Sol 3. That part had been holding its breath. Now it relaxed. "Broadcast the subjugation decree," he said. "All galactic standard languages, then their local languages." The message went out on every frequency. It was the standard Valesi conquest announcement. "Surrender your world. Submit to the Dominion. Resistance will be met with destruction." It played in 300 galactic languages, and then in English, Mandarin, Hindi, Spanish, and Arabic. Nothing happened. No response. No military scramble. No panic transmissions between human governments. The planet simply continued spinning, its billions of inhabitants going about their ordinary lives as if 200 warships had not just appeared in their sky. Torvak waited an hour, then 2. Nothing. "They don't even know we're here," he muttered. "Fine. Show them." He ordered a demonstration strike. A single plasma lance, a concentrated beam of energy hot enough to melt stone, fired from the Dominion's fang and struck an empty stretch of the Sahara Desert. 50 square kilometers of sand turned to glass in an instant. The blast was visible from space, a bright scar on the planet's surface. That got their attention. Within seconds, every electronic system on every Valesi ship glitched. Screens flickered. Navigation went dark. Weapons systems stuttered. Life support hiccuped. It lasted exactly 1.3 seconds, and then everything came back online, as if nothing had happened. "Report," Torvak snapped. Ilian's claws were trembling on her console. "I detected a signal during the disruption, Commander. It came from the planet's surface. It was not random interference. Intentional." "What did it say?" Ilian looked at him. Her scales had gone pale, the color draining from her face the way it did when a Valesi was deeply, fundamentally afraid. "It translates to one word, Commander. Don't." Torvak stared at her. Then he straightened his back and set his jaw. He was Valesi. He was a conqueror. He did not take orders from insects. "Prepare the ground forces. We are landing." 5,000 Valesi soldiers descended on London in armored dropships. They expected chaos, screaming civilians, desperate military resistance, the pathetic last stand of a primitive species. They had done this 17 times before on 17 different worlds. London did not cooperate. The dropships landed in the streets around Trafalgar Square, crushing a few parked cars and startling a significant number of pigeons. Valesi soldiers poured out in full combat armor, weapons raised, scanning for threats. People stared at them. A woman with a shopping bag stopped and took a photo. A man on a bicycle swerved around a dropship and shouted something rude. A group of teenagers pointed and laughed. An old man with a newspaper looked up, said "bloody hell," and went back to reading. Nobody ran. Nobody screamed. Nobody surrendered. A Valesi lieutenant, confused and irritated, grabbed a human man by the arm and demanded in broken English to know where the planet's leaders were. The man blinked at him. "Mate, I just work at Tesco." Torvak, watching the ground feed from orbit, felt something cold crawl up his spine. This was wrong. Every species they had ever conquered had reacted with fear. These creatures were acting as if an alien invasion was a minor inconvenience, less important than their evening commute. "Hold positions," he ordered his ground forces. "Establish a perimeter. Wait for further instructions." He did not know what he was waiting for, but something in his gut told him to wait. He should have listened to his gut sooner. It began slowly. Across the planet, in places that had no connection to each other, certain humans started to change. In Norway, the old woman named Sigrid stood up from her porch chair. She had not stood without pain in 15 years. Now she rose like water flowing uphill, smooth and effortless, and the ache in her joints was gone. Her eyes were gold, and they were not the eyes of an old woman. They were the eyes of something that had watched stars being born. In Japan, a fisherman named Kaito set down his rod and began walking toward the coast. Each step he took left a scorch mark on the ground, not from heat, but from energy. Raw, barely contained power leaking from his body, like light through cracks in a wall. In Buenos Aires, a 7-year-old girl named Sofia stopped playing with her dolls. She looked at her mother and spoke in a language that no human had used in 12,000 years, a language that predated every civilization in the galaxy. "They broke the covenant," Sofia said. "We have to go now." Her mother dropped the dish she was holding. It shattered on the floor. And then, slowly, terribly, she began to remember. Not learn, remember. Knowledge that had been locked inside her blood, sealed in her DNA, buried beneath 12 millennia of deliberately chosen ignorance, came flooding back like a river breaking through a dam. She fell to her knees and wept from the weight of suddenly knowing what she was. It happened to 800,000 people across the planet. Farmers, teachers, doctors, children, old men, young women. It did not matter who they were or what they did. Something in their genetic code activated, and the world they had known dissolved like fog in sunlight. They remembered. On the Valesi flagship, Ilian stared at her sensor readings and could not make sense of what she was seeing. Energy signatures were appearing across Earth's surface. Not from machines, not from power plants, not from any technology her instruments could identify. The energy was coming from individual humans. Specific people, scattered across every continent, were beginning to radiate power at levels that made no sense. Each one of them was outputting more energy than a small star. "Commander," Ilian said, and her voice was barely a whisper. "Commander, you need to see this." Torvak looked at the readings. His blood went cold. "What are they?" he asked. "I don't know," Ilian said, "but they are waking up. More every minute, and the energy levels are still climbing." On the station world Athspire, half a galaxy away, the Concorde's long-range sensors detected the same thing. Ambassador Quovan was dragged from his quarters in restraints, shouting that his fleet would prove everyone wrong. No one was listening to him. Elder Munum activated the emergency broadcast system, something that had not been used in 3,000 years. Their voice, thin and cracked with age, reached every species in the galaxy. "Directive 0 has been breached," Munum said. "The sleepers of Sol 3 are waking. May the cosmos forgive us all." And on a quiet street in London, a 19-year-old girl named Ilara dropped the cup of coffee she had been carrying. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring. No, not blurring. She could see things she had never seen before. The atoms in the air, the spin of electrons, the invisible threads of gravity connecting everything to everything else. Her eyes turned gold. She looked up at the sky, where she could now see, clearly, perfectly, as if they were hanging right above her. 200 Valesi warships in orbit. "Oh no," she whispered. She was not afraid of the ships. She was afraid of what she was about to become. The memories came like a flood, and they were not gentle. Sigrid stood on the Norwegian coast and watched 12,000 years of buried history pour back into her mind. She saw herself, not this body, not this life, but the thing she truly was, walking on worlds that had no names yet. She saw herself reaching into the heart of a dying star and restarting it like a stopped clock. She saw herself drawing lines of force through empty space, building the invisible roads that every species in the galaxy now used to travel between stars, never knowing who had made them. She remembered the wars, human against human, power against power, factions tearing at the fabric of reality itself in their fury. She remembered the moment when the fighting nearly broke everything, when the structure of space-time cracked like thin ice, and the universe came within a breath of collapsing into nothing. And she remembered the choice. The survivors, tired, grief-stricken, horrified by what they had almost done, had gathered on Earth and made a decision. They would give it up. All of it. The power, the knowledge, the ability to reshape matter and energy with a thought. They would lock it away in their own blood, bury it so deep that no one would ever find it, and they would forget. They would become ordinary. They would live small, short, beautiful lives, and never again risk destroying everything that existed. They wrote Directive Zero themselves, and gave it to the young species just beginning to crawl toward the stars. A simple instruction, a desperate plea. We are too dangerous to be awake. And for 12,000 years, it had worked. Kaito found Sigrid on the coast. He had walked across the ocean to reach her, not on a boat, not flying, simply walking across the surface of the water as if it were solid ground, each step sending ripples of energy outward for miles. He looked the same as he had that morning, a weathered Japanese fisherman in rubber boots, but his eyes were gold, and the air around him hummed with barely contained power. How many? Sigrid asked. 800,000 so far. More every hour. The children too? The children too. Sigrid closed her eyes. She had hoped, foolishly, selfishly, that the remembering would skip the young ones, that they would be spared the weight of knowing what humanity truly was. But the activation was genetic. It did not care about age. And the ones in London, she asked, the Valesi soldiers? They have not fired on anyone. I think they are too confused. Good. Then we still have time to be kind. In London, Alara was trying very hard not to lose her mind. She was standing in the middle of a street near Trafalgar Square, surrounded by Valesi soldiers who had no idea what was happening, and she could see everything. Every atom, every quantum vibration, every thought in the minds of every living creature within 100 miles. The barrage of information was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a waterfall. She had been a barista. Yesterday, her biggest problem was a customer who complained that his oat milk was too hot. Now she could feel the rotation of the planet beneath her feet. A Valesi soldier noticed her standing in the street and aimed his weapon at her. Move, he barked in broken English. Restricted area. Alara looked at him. She could see his heartbeat, fast, scared. She could feel his emotions, confusion, fear, loneliness. He was young, she realized. Young and far from home, and following orders he did not fully understand. It's okay, she said softly. You don't need to be afraid. The soldier fired. The plasma bolt left his weapon at 3,000 meters per second. It crossed the distance between them in less than 100th of a second, and it stopped. Not slowed, stopped. It hung in the air in front of Alara's face, a bright ball of burning energy, frozen in place as if time itself had grabbed it and held on. Alara looked at the bolt, then at the soldier. She felt tired and sad and very sorry for what was about to happen. She raised her hand, and the bolt dissolved into soft light that drifted away like dust. Then she reached out, not physically, but with the part of her mind that was still learning what it could do, and she touched every Valesi weapon in a 2-kilometer radius. The rifles, the sidearms, the grenades, the armor plating. She did not break them. She did not melt them. She simply asked the atoms to let go of each other. 5,000 weapons came apart simultaneously, not explosively, gently. The metal separated into its component elements. The energy cells discharged harmlessly. The polymers unraveled into simple molecules. Every single weapon turned into a small pile of harmless dust at the feet of the soldier carrying it. 5,000 Valesi soldiers stood in the streets of London, completely disarmed, staring at their empty hands. Alara looked at the young soldier who had shot at her. You should leave now, she said, while we are still deciding to be kind. In orbit, Commander Torvok watched the ground feeds and felt his world collapse. He had seen many things in his career. He had conquered worlds. He had faced enemies who fought with desperation and courage. But he had never seen anything like this. "Orbital bombardment," he ordered. His voice was steady, but his claws were shaking. "Target the city. Maximum yield." "Commander," Ilian began. "Do it." The Dominion's Fang fired. A dozen plasma lances, each one powerful enough to level a mountain, streaked toward London. The beams hit something invisible about 20 kilometers above the city. They did not explode. They did not dissipate. They bent. Like light passing through a prism, the beams curved gently upward, redirected by a force that the ship's sensors could not identify, and vanished harmlessly into the upper atmosphere. Torvak fired again and again. Every shot bent away. Then a voice spoke. It did not come through the communication systems. It did not use radio waves or quantum channels or any technology at all. It was simply there, present inside the mind of every Valesi crew member on every ship in the fleet. A calm voice, an old voice, a voice that carried the weight of ages. "We asked you not to come. We wrote it in stone older than your species. We carved it into the laws of your civilization before your civilization existed. You burned our desert. You pointed weapons at our children." A pause. Every Valesi in the fleet held their breath. "We are now awake, and we remember everything." Torvak sat down heavily in his command chair. His legs would not support him any longer. On his view screen, the blue planet hung peacefully in the void, beautiful and silent, and for the first time in his life, he understood what real power looked like. It did not roar. It did not threaten. It spoke quietly, because it did not need to shout. At the edge of the solar system, a Concord peacekeeping fleet of 2,000 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They had come as fast as they could, not to fight the humans, but to beg. "We are sorry," their commander broadcasts on all channels. The Valesi acted alone. This was not sanctioned by the Concord. "Please, we ask you to go back to sleep. Return to your lives. Forget this happened." Her voice, transmitted through the same impossible telepathic channel, reached every ship. "We cannot. Once the remembering begins, it cannot be undone. The locks are broken. The seals are open. We are awake now. All of us." She paused. When she spoke again, there was a heaviness in her words that made the Concord commander's chest ache. "We need to decide what that means. For us, and for you, and for everything." On Earth, 800,000 awakened humans stood in silence. Some were in cities, surrounded by confused, frightened neighbors. Some were alone in forests, in deserts, on mountaintops. Some were children clutching their parents' hands. All of them were connected, their minds linked in a vast web of shared consciousness, debating, arguing, remembering. The debate was not about the Valesi. Destroying the fleet would take less effort than blowing out a candle. The debate was about something much bigger. Should they return to the stars? Should they use their power again, the power that had nearly unraveled reality the last time they wielded it? Or should they find a way to go back to sleep and pray that no one ever woke them again? The galaxy held its breath, and 800,000 golden eyes looked inward, searching for an answer. The awakened called their shared consciousness the chorus. 800,000 minds, linked together across every continent, thinking as one and arguing as many. It was beautiful and chaotic and deeply impossibly human. Because even with the power to reshape reality, humans could not agree on what to do with it. 3 voices rose above the rest. Sigrid spoke for the Wardens. She stood on her Norwegian coast, the cold wind pulling at her silver hair, and she argued for silence, for retreat, for finding a way to seal the power again and return to ordinary life. "We chose to sleep for a reason," she said, her thoughts rippling through the chorus like stones dropped in water. "We nearly destroyed everything. We looked into the heart of our own power and saw madness staring back. The sleep was not weakness. It was wisdom. We should honor it. Kaito spoke for the returners. He stood on the shore of Japan, the ocean at his back, and he argued for return. 12,000 years had passed. The galaxy was full of suffering, dying worlds, endless wars, species crying out for help that never came. Humanity had built this universe. They had seeded the first life, lit the first stars, laid the roads between worlds. They had a responsibility. We cannot hide from what we are, Kaito said. We built this house, we filled it with life, and then we walked away and let them struggle alone. How many species have suffered because we chose to look away? How many worlds have died because we were too afraid of ourselves to help? And then there was Null. No one knew Null's real name. No one knew where they stood or what face they wore. They were the oldest of the awakened, older than Sigrid, older than anyone. Their memories stretched back to the wars themselves, to the terrible days when human factions had torn reality apart. They had seen things that the others only remembered as distant echoes. Null spoke for the erasers. Their voice was cold and flat, like a blade laid on stone. We are a weapon, Null said. We have always been a weapon. Every time we tell ourselves we can control this power, we are lying. The wardens want to sleep again, but the locks are broken. We cannot sleep. The returners want to help, but help always becomes control, and control always becomes war. There is only one safe option. We must destroy the sleeper genes permanently. Rewrite our own DNA. Make it impossible for any human to ever awaken again. End this. Forever. The chorus erupted. 800,000 voices clashing, debating, pleading. The argument was not just philosophical, it was personal. Every awakened carried the weight of two lives, the ordinary person they had been yesterday, and the ancient being they had become today. A teacher who could now move mountains. A farmer who could hear the thoughts of every creature in his fields. A child who understood the equations that governed the birth and death of stars. They were scared, all of them, even the powerful ones, especially the powerful ones. While the chorus debated, Ilara walked through the streets of London. The Valesi soldiers had retreated to their dropships after their weapons dissolved. They sat inside, confused and frightened, waiting for orders from a commander who was too paralyzed to give any. Ilara approached the nearest dropship and knocked on the hull. The door opened. A dozen Valesi soldiers stared at her. The girl who had stopped a plasma bolt with her mind and disarmed 5,000 troops with a wave of her hand. "Can I come in?" she asked. "I brought biscuits." She had, in fact, stolen a packet of chocolate biscuits from an abandoned shop. She held them up like a peace offering. The soldiers looked at each other. One of them, the young one who had shot at her, slowly stepped aside. Ilara sat on the floor of the dropship and shared biscuits with a squad of alien soldiers who had come to conquer her planet. And she talked to them, not with telepathy, not with cosmic power, but with words. Simple, ordinary words. She learned that the young soldier's name was Veska. He was 22. He had joined the military because his family needed the income. He had never wanted to conquer anything. He just wanted to send money home. She learned that the Valesi homeworld, Vel Prime, was dying. Their star was slowly failing, a natural process that would take centuries but could not be reversed. The planet was getting colder every year. Crops were failing. Children were sick. The Valesi conquered other worlds because they believed it was the only way to find a new home before their old one froze. "We asked the Concord for help," Veska said, his scales dull with exhaustion. "We asked for relocation assistance, for terraforming support, for anything. They said it was too expensive, too complicated. They told us to file a petition and wait." "How long ago was that?" Ilara asked. 300 years. Ilara was quiet for a long time, Then she took this knowledge, the fear, the desperation, the simple need to survive, and she shared it with the chorus. 800,000 minds felt what the Valesi felt. 800,000 ancient beings, wrapped in the power of gods, experienced the small, desperate fear of a species watching its children grow cold. It changed things. Not the debate. That was still raging. But it changed the tone. The anger softened. The judgment paused. On that spire, Ambassador Kovan sat in a holding cell and waited for the Concord to decide his punishment. He did not have to wait long, but the punishment did not come from the Concord. A man appeared in his cell. Not through the door. There was no flash of light, no sound. One moment the cell was empty, and the next Kaito was standing there, still wearing his rubber fishing boots, still smelling faintly of salt water. Kovan scrambled backward against the wall. Kaito did not threaten him. He did not raise his hand or his voice. He just looked at the Valesi ambassador with eyes that were older than Kovan's entire species, and he asked one question: why? It was such a simple word, but it carried weight. The weight of someone who genuinely wanted to understand, not to judge, not to punish, just to know. Kovan, for the first time in his political career, told the truth. Because my people are dying, he said. Our star is failing, our world is freezing, and no one in this galaxy would help us. They told us to wait, they told us to be patient, they told us to fill out forms while our children starved. His voice broke. What was I supposed to do? Watch them die, quietly. Kaito was silent for a long time. Then he said, We will help you, but first you must answer for the fire you brought to our home. Back in the Sol system, the Valesi fleet hung motionless in orbit, surrounded by the Concord peacekeeping force. Commander Torvak had given no orders in hours. He sat in his chair and stared at Earth and waited for the end. The end came gently. Every ship in both fleets, Valesi and Concord, lost power simultaneously. Engines, weapons, shields, lights, everything went dark. But life support remained on. Gravity plating kept working. The crews floated in darkness, breathing, alive, unharmed. Then the ships began to move. Not under their own power. Something was carrying them. Gently, carefully, like a parent lifting a sleeping child. The Valesi fleet was picked up and deposited, ship by ship, at the edge of the solar system. Their weapons were fused. Every cannon, every missile, every plasma lance melted into a solid lump of inert metal. Useless, permanent. But their engines worked. Their navigation systems came back online. A message appeared on every screen in the Valesi fleet, written in their own language, in their own script. Go home. Tell your people what you saw. We will come to you soon, not as conquerors, not as enemies, as what we were always meant to be. Torvak read the message 3 times. Then he ordered his fleet to set course for Vel Prime. On Earth, the chorus was reaching its decision. The debate had gone on for 2 days. Sigrid argued for caution. Kaito argued for duty. Null argued for oblivion. Thousands of voices pushed and pulled in every direction. And then Ilara spoke. She was the youngest voice in the chorus. She had been awakened for less than 72 hours. She did not have Sigrid's ancient wisdom, or Kaito's steady conviction, or Null's terrible experience. She had a packet of half-eaten biscuits, and a memory of sitting on the floor of an alien dropship, talking to a scared young soldier about his family. I don't want to be a god, Ilara said, and I don't want to go back to sleep, and I don't want to erase what we are. I want a third option. The chorus listened. We go back to the stars, not to rule, not to control, not to fix everything because we think we know better. We go back to help. When someone asks for help, we help. When someone tells us to leave, we leave. We use this power the way it should have been used the first time. Not to build empires, but to build something better." She paused. "And if we start to lose our way, if the power starts to corrupt us again, we ask the galaxy to tell us. We give them the right to say no to us. We give them the right to tell us to stop." It was not a perfect solution. It was not a safe solution. It was a human solution, messy, hopeful, and built on the stubborn belief that people could choose to be better than they were. The chorus voted. It was close, so close that the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. The third path won by less than 100 votes. Sigrid stood on her Norwegian coast and looked up at the stars. For the first time in 12,000 years, they did not look like a prison. They looked like a road. "We're going back," she whispered. Behind her, across the planet, 800,000 pairs of golden eyes turned toward the sky. The Awakened did not build ships. They did not need to. Kaito stood on the coast of Japan, closed his eyes, and folded space. It was not a technology. It was not a machine. It was a thing that humans had learned to do before most stars in the galaxy had finished forming. A simple bending of the distance between 2 points, the way a person might fold a piece of paper to bring 2 corners together. One moment he was standing on Earth. The next, he was standing on the surface of Vel Prime, the dying homeworld of the species that had tried to conquer his planet. 30 Awakened followed him. They arrived in silence, appearing out of thin air on a frozen plain outside the Valesi capital city. The sky above them was dim. Their sun, once bright and warm, now cast a pale, sickly light that barely held back the cold. The temperature was 40 degrees below zero. The Awakened did not seem to notice. Within an hour, thousands of Valesi had gathered at the edges of the plain, watching the humans with a mixture of terror and desperate hope. Commander Torvak was among them. He had returned home 3 days earlier, and he had told his people everything. Most of them had not believed him. Now they stood in the freezing wind and watched 30 soft, small, golden-eyed creatures kneel on the ice and place their hands flat against the ground. The Awakened reached down through the rock, through the molten core of the planet, through the gravity well itself, and into the heart of the dying star. They worked for 3 days. It was not dramatic. There were no explosions, no flashing lights, no great spectacle. The Awakened simply knelt on the ice, still and silent, while deep inside the star, processes that had been winding down for millennia began to reverse. Fusion cycles that had slowed were reignited. Core temperatures that had been falling began to climb. The collapse that would have killed Vel Prime in another few centuries was stopped, and then undone, and then corrected. On the 3rd day, the sun brightened. It happened slowly, a gradual warming of the light, a shift from pale gray to soft gold. But the Valesi noticed immediately. They had lived under a dying sun for generations. They knew what its light should look like, and they knew what this change meant. Their star was alive again. Millions of Valesi stood under the brightening sky and wept. Old soldiers dropped to their knees. Children pointed at the sun and laughed because they had never seen it shine this way. Torvak stood among his people, with tears running down his scaled face, and he did not try to hide them. Kaito stood up, brushed the frost from his knees, and said, "Your world will live. The star is stable. It will burn for another 5 billion years." Torvak stared at him. "Why?" he asked. "We tried to enslave your people. Why would you help us?" Kaito looked at him with those ancient golden eyes. "Because you were afraid," he said, "and we know what fear can make people do." News of Vel Prime spread across the galaxy like fire. The Galactic Concord did not know what to make of it. Some species celebrated, the broken, the dying. the worlds that the Concord's endless bureaucracy had failed. They sent messages to Earth, tentative and hopeful. Can you help us too? Others recoiled in fear. If the humans could restart a star, what else could they do? What would stop them from conquering everything? The Hollow Minds, an ancient machine intelligence collective, vast networks of conscious crystal that had existed nearly as long as the archivists, sent a delegation to Earth. They were old enough to remember humanity from before. They remembered the devastation. Their message was blunt and delivered without emotion, as was their way. The last time you walked the stars, you nearly tore the universe apart. 300 species were erased from existence. 2 galaxies were permanently scarred. The fundamental constants of physics were destabilized across an entire galactic arm. What makes this time different? Alara answered them. She had become, almost by accident, the voice of the third path, not because she was the oldest or the strongest, but because she was the most human. She still burned toast. She still forgot where she put her keys. She still cried at sad movies. And somehow this made the galaxy trust her more than the ancient, godlike beings she walked among. Last time, we thought we were gods, Alara said. This time, we know we are not. The Hollow Minds considered this for 11 seconds, which for a machine intelligence was an extraordinarily long time. Then they said, "We will watch, and we will remember." "Good," Alara said. "That is exactly what we need." Over the following months, the Awakened spread across the galaxy. They did not arrive in fleets. They did not announce themselves with displays of power. They simply appeared, on war-torn worlds, on dying planets, in refugee camps, and plague zones, and places that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. They healed worlds that had been poisoned by industrial waste, pulling the toxins from soil and water, molecule by molecule. They stabilized collapsing hyperspace corridors, the ancient roads they themselves had built millennia ago, that species depended on for trade and survival. They stood between armies that had been fighting for centuries and shared something that no weapon could defend against: empathy. They let each side feel what the other side felt, not thoughts, feelings, fear, grief, love. The simple, aching desire to see their children grow up safe. Wars ended. Not all of them, not even most, but some. And the ones that ended, ended for good. Not every species accepted their help. The Grethine Collective sealed their borders and refused all contact. The Sylph Nomads, a proud and ancient spacefaring culture, politely told the humans that they preferred to solve their own problems. The Awakened respected this immediately and without argument, which surprised the galaxy more than anything else they had done. But not all the Awakened were at peace. Null had gone quiet after the vote. They had not joined the third path. They had not spoken in the chorus. They had simply vanished, retreating into silence, and Sigrid, who understood the weight of ancient pain better than anyone, had let them go. That was a mistake. 3 months after the awakening, sensors deep inside the Earth detected an activation. Something buried in the planet's core, something impossibly old, put there by humans before they chose to forget, was powering up. It was a device called the Final Word, and it was exactly what Null had argued for. A genetic rewriting tool capable of reaching every human on Earth simultaneously and destroying the sleeper genes forever. It would strip away everything that made an Awakened what they were. It would make the remembering impossible. It would end humanity's power permanently. Null had found it. Null was activating it. The chorus erupted in alarm. Sigrid and Kaito moved to intervene, but the device was shielded by defenses older than any of them. Only one person could reach it in time. Alara descended into the Earth. She found Null in a vast chamber deep beneath the surface, a cathedral of ancient crystal and living metal, the last remnant of the civilization humanity had been before it chose to forget. The Final Word hung in the center of the chamber, a sphere of light that pulsed with terrible potential. Null stood before it. They were tall and thin, and their golden eyes burned with the intensity of someone who had spent 12,000 years carrying a grief that no one else could understand. "Step aside, child," Null said. "I am saving us from ourselves." "You are killing us," Alara said. "I am killing the part of us that destroys everything it touches." Alara did not fight. She did not raise her hand or summon her power. She simply stood there, in front of the most dangerous being on Earth, and she did something that no god would ever think to do. She opened her mind, completely, without protection. She showed Null her memories, not the awakened memories, the human ones. Making coffee at 6 in the morning while half asleep. Laughing with friends at a terrible joke. Burning toast and eating it anyway. Sitting on her apartment floor at 2 in the morning, crying about nothing and everything, with her cat asleep in her lap. The small, silly, heartbreaking beauty of an ordinary life. "This is what we are fighting for," Alara said. "Not power, not legacy, not some cosmic destiny. Just this. The right to be small and alive and messy and scared and hopeful. The right to be people." Null stared at her. The light from the final word flickered. "We were so afraid of the monster," Null whispered, "that we forgot the human." The device deactivated. Null collapsed to the ground and wept, not the cold tears of an ancient being, but the raw, ugly crying of a person who had been holding on too long and had finally let go. Alara sat beside them on the floor of that ancient chamber and said nothing, because sometimes the most human thing you can do is just be there. 1 year after the awakening, the Galactic Concord convened a new summit on 8th Spire. For the first time in history, humanity had a seat at the table. Sigrid, Kaito, and Alara represented their species, the elder, the soldier, and the barista. They presented a document. They called it the New Covenant, and they offered it freely, without conditions. "We are the first walkers. We built the roads you travel and lit the stars you orbit. We forgot ourselves once so the universe could grow without our shadow. Now we are awake, and we choose, freely, fully, and without condition, to walk beside you, not above you, not ahead of you, beside you. And if we ever lose our way again, we ask you to remind us of what we are. Not gods, just people, the first people, and we are glad to finally come home." Every species in the Concord signed it, even the Valesi. 5 years passed. Alara sat in a cafe on 8th Spire, the great station world that served as the Concord's capital. Her eyes were brown. She had learned to dim the gold, to tuck it away, to look ordinary. She was drinking something that an enterprising Valesi merchant had sworn was basically coffee. It was not. It tasted like burned rubber mixed with regret. She drank it anyway. Across from her sat a young Valesi named Torek, Commander Torvak's grandchild. He was studying human history at the 8th Spire Academy, the first Valesi ever to do so. He had 1,000 questions, and Alara had learned that the best way to handle them was one at a time. "What did it feel like," Torek asked, "when you woke up?" Alara thought about it. She thought about the fear and the power, and the crushing weight of 12,000 years of memory. She thought about biscuits on the floor of a dropship and a frozen planet with a brightening sky, and an ancient being weeping in a crystal chamber. Then she smiled. "It felt like remembering a dream you have had your whole life," she said, "and realizing it was real. All of it, the good parts and the terrible parts, and then choosing, even though you were scared, to get out of bed anyway." Torek nodded slowly, not fully understanding. He would, someday. They all would. Outside the cafe window, the galaxy turned, vast and ancient, and full of life that humanity had planted in its soil a very long time ago. Ships moved along hyperspace corridors that human hands had built before history began. Stars burned that human hearts had restarted. And on 1,000 worlds, in 1,000 languages, people told the story of the species that had slept for 12,000 years and woken up, not as gods, but as neighbors. The universe had one rule. The Valesi broke it. And humanity. Stubborn, messy, scared, hopeful, impossibly kind humanity answered not with wrath, but with an open hand. For the first time in 12,000 years, the universe was not afraid. And somewhere in a cafe, on a station at the edge of forever, a girl who used to make coffee for a living sipped the worst drink in the galaxy and laughed.